This guitar interactive feature is brought to you by the Orange Glenn Hughes Signature O Bass and the Glenn Hughes Signature Crush Bass 50 amplifier. Visit orangeamps.com for more information.
The man, the myth, the legend, the icon,
so
the voice. There's so many names, and none of them really.
But very awkward on Zoom.
Well, that's it. We'll have a lovely image of you on screen, to make up for that fact. But none of these names, they really live up to what you are, Glenn, which is just an icon of music. Now you're back with Black Country Communion once again, the album 5. At this stage in the game, Glenn, we know. Well, it's always been the way with you. You don't do anything half-arsed. You don't do anything unless you've got something to say. So why was it now that it was time for Black Country Communion 5?
Well, Joe came to me in 2019, and that's when I joined a band called the Dead Daisies. And between you and me, Jonathan, I had no idea when I joined the Daisies that they would not want me to do anything outside of that band. So I had to tell Joe in early 2020, when we got hit by the pandemic, although there was a pandemic, I still couldn't do anything. So the truth of the matter is, Jonathan, I had to wait till to get a chance to leave the Daisies at Christmas in 2022. Joe and I had Christmas dinner, and we decided to make number 5.
It's just as simple as that. Yeah, just the vibe was there. You knew the time was right. And when did you first get to start playing together again?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but all albums have been written at my home studio. They normally take 5 or 6 or 7 writing sessions at my studio. I know exactly where Joe's going to sit. I know exactly what amp he's going to use at my studio, and everything happens at my place. And then we write the music, and then we go into the studio and joined by Jason and Derek and Kevin.
And the first track that came out of these sessions?
First track was Open Road. I remember, yeah.
Yeah, of course, closing out the album perfectly there. I mean, I'm still getting used to it. I've been, lucky enough to hear ahead of time absolutely 10 blistering tracks on there. I think Red Sun is coming out as an early favourite for me. Is there any of these that's, because obviously you're still living with them as well, only playing, a handful?
Look, I think it's common knowledge when you read the credits on the album. All songs written by Glenn and Joe. Except 2. I did write Stay Free and Letting Go in 2022 for my solo album, which I'm going to make next month. But I played these 2 songs to Joe, Jonathan, and he thought they would be perfect for BCC. So those 2 songs aside, all the rest of it, of course, music was written by Joe and Glenn, and the lyrics are always, I wrote the lyrics, as you know. But listen, man, it doesn't really matter who wrote the songs. It's a great fucking album. I love working with all of these guys. Joe and I are very close. We're neighbors in LA. Joe plays with me in New York and LA, London, anytime he sees me play. And we're very, very close. And we really, really thoroughly enjoyed writing this album.
Was there any chance this wasn't going to happen, Glenn?
No. And I say very clearly, in the Dead Daisies, they knew that I'm a member of BCC, and they knew how important that band is to me. I don't think David Lowy had a problem with it. I think the manager did. But I'll tell you right now, nothing is going to stand in the way of me making music with Joseph. He's one of my closest friends, and I have a great embodiment of a friendship and bond musically with Joseph. So I'm always going to make music with Joe.
That's beautiful to hear. Now, you've obviously been involved in so many bands and projects over the years, and you've got a tremendous solo career. Do you find that when you're writing for your solo records or with a project that the process is different for you?
It's different. For my work, you remember, if I've got Joe Bonamassa working with me, I've got the greatest rock blues player of all time with me, and songs are more dedicated to what Joe would bring and write. With my band, it's groove orientated, a little bit more soulful, as you can see with my music. But Jonathan, it's not that far away from each other.
Of course. Now, I can't not pick up on the fact that you just mentioned that you're going to be working on a new solo album. I know we're here to talk about Black Country Communion 5,
Yeah.
but I'd be remiss to, you know, 2016 was the last one. What a killer record that is.
Thank you.
What can you tell us about this solo music?
I'm
When will we
actually-
hear something?
In between interviews today, I'm writing a new song number 4. So
Wow.
it's going really, really well. I wrote the music about 6 months ago and I finished all the music about, funny enough, 3 weeks ago, and I'm now writing lyrics. We go in the studio on June the 1st, and in 19 days the album will be finished. So I presume it'll be out next March.
And who's on it, Glenn? Soren back?
Soren is back with me, and Ash Sheehan, my drummer, from my band, and Bob Pritzimmer, keyboards. I think my friend Chad Smith will be guesting, as he'll be in Copenhagen sometime in June. So Chad has played on every album I've done in the last 15 years.
Lovely. Oh, that's gonna be fantastic. Now, you mentioned there that when you go in, you're looking at like 19 days getting it done. Has that always been the case for you? Like getting in the studio, get it done quickly, or has there been some processes that you found it's been a long time getting an album made?
Jonathan, all the music is ready and all the lyrics are ready. I don't see any reason why it can't be done in that time, because I normally come in the studio with everything finished. This time, it's going to be a real look. I've got how many days now? About, I don't know, 3 weeks before it's the 1st of June. I'm still traveling, and I've got a couple of days off, so I'm spending most of my time. I've got 4 lyrics written now. I've got 6 to go. I should be on point. So if I've got it on point by the 31st of May, I'll be okay.
That's fantastic. And over your career, Glenn, what has been the most challenging record for you to complete?
Record?
Yeah.
Oh, and this is going to sound strange, but I've never been challenged.
Fantastic.
I say that with love because I do like a challenge, but my music is the center of my existence. Of course, my wife is and my sobriety comes first, you know. But my music it just flows through me. If you know anything about my career, I'm a songwriter, and the songs they're born within me, and I have the ability to wake up in the morning and just work, you know, and get these songs done.
Well, I think that's the thing that's sometimes a little bit, you know, misunderstood over great artists, is how much work is actually put into it. Because yeah, you're saying that there's the element that you found it easy, but it's easy because you put the work in, isn't it? And when did you first discover that was the process, that sort of getting up every day and working at it was the key to this?
We got to look at my timeline of sobriety. I got sober and clean from drugs on Christmas Day '91, and when I got out of bed for maybe in the mid part of '92, that's when I made my first sober album, the blues album. And ever since then, Jonathan, I've been writing about the human condition. I don't write about fiction about pussy and smoking cigarettes, and I write about us as humans, and that's the way I write my songs. Let me be a devotee to that behavior, because I talk about freedom, I talk about healing, I talk about letting go in all my work. There's a thread from that blues album in '92 all the way to this new album.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, Addiction is one of my favourites, and of course that's right in that period as well. It's just
that was a dark album. That was a dark album because I was singing about my getting clean in the early '90s.
Did you feel that you needed to be a little bit removed from it to be able
I
to
needed
write?
to make that album because this is a great story. I made an album called Feel in '95, and the record company thought, they were a Japanese company. Oh, so funky. I went, and you've only got to challenge me on that. Okay. Is that too funky? Well, check this fucking. Then I wrote Addiction, which was fucking heavier than shit.
Yeah.
Oh, too heavy. So, for me, that's the challenge I like, when somebody tells me. I don't like people telling me what to do with my fucking music. No record company, Jonathan, respectfully, will tell me what to do with my music.
For sure. And do you find that on California Breed there was an element of that? Did you feel like there was too many hands getting involved in how that project worked out?
No. Dave Cobb was producing, as you know. He was fucking great. You know, the element with that process, and I say this with love and respect, because Andrew Watt was a brand new fight, you know, 20-year-old kid from New York, an unknown. A great challenge for me and him was because he's such an incredible songwriter. And I knew, by the way, at some point he'd go on to have great ambition and success. But it was a challenge because we were so locked into the songwriting, he and I, at my home studio, that we created a lot of great songs. There was no behind-the-scenes quarrels, or we left it up to Dave Cobb to figure out how we did it, you know?
I mean, it's a great record, Glenn. You know, is there ever anything that you sort of feel like that project could have continued and flourished some more music?
Let's go over that again. It's in the history of rock and roll. Band was formed 2013. We made the record in 2014, I believe, in a Dave's studio in Nashville. We started touring late in the year. And then we did 2 shows with Jason in New York and LA. And he said, you know something? I don't think I'm up to doing this. I've been offered something to do with Sammy Hagar. And I thought, oh my, the red flag is coming. And Andrew and I had to figure out who's going to replace Jason. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue with. And this is really a difficult thing to talk about. Andrew was pushing to get this guy, Joey C. from Queens of the Stone Age on drums. I didn't know anything about this guy. I met with him privately and had a good conversation with him. And then he joined the band, and he was not the right fit. Personally and musically, he was not the right fit. I didn't get along with him, and that was the first bone of contention for me. And that caused a problem between me and Andrew. And consequently, because of Joey's being the wrong decision, I decided to fold the band at the end of 2014. And I just had to get away from it, because it was ruining what I wanted to do with Andrew. Joey was the wrong fit. Didn't enjoy working with him one bit.
See, this is the thing, Glenn. You know, you've been involved in so many amazing projects that fans, we want more from everything, you know? So we're always going to be asking those questions no matter how many years go past.
If I'm working with the drummer disrespecting me night daily and didn't know how to play my music, I'm going to let you go. So at that time, we played Planet Rockstock. It was a disaster. Something happened on stage. Andrew was drunk. He knows about this. And I left the stage and I said, I'm done now. I wasn't happy with the manager of California Breed. So I decided to step away from it, you know. And look, Andrew went on to greatness. And I knew he would do great. I wish him only the very best. It's a sad tale, but these things happen.
It does. It definitely does happen. And now, Glenn, let's talk about bass guitar, your first love. When did that fire sort of build up inside you for bass guitar? Like, what was your first sort of those notes that you heard that just made you feel like this is the one for me?
Well, I started playing guitar at 11 years old. My mum bought me my first guitar, you know, just a piece of wood, really, at Cannock in Staffordshire. And, you know, I spent my, you know, pre-teens and early teens playing, you know, in my living room, the Beatles and the Stones covers, you know, and then the Who and the Kinks, you know. And then I joined a couple of bands when I was at school, you know, teenage bands, playing guitar. And then one, you know, Mel Galley was born in the same town as me. He was 4 years older than me, and he was my guitar hero. And he was in a band called Finders Keepers. And their bass player left. And Mel told the leader of Finders Keepers, I know a great bass guitar player. Maybe he can play bass. So I just switched from playing guitar at age 16 to bass guitar. And overnight, I became a bass player. And only simply to play bass with Mel, because he was my hero.
Well, I mean, for those reasons and what has ended up coming out, all the music you've created is just incredible. Now, at the time, you've gone through different bass rigs and what have you. You got a fantastic relationship with the guys over at Orange, and I know you go way back with Cliff. Just touch a little bit on that, because you get your signature gear with them. Yeah. I'm assuming a lot of that made its way to the new Black Country Communion record.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, Orange. I a quick story. 2010. I'm down at the NAMM show, and I met Cliff. I met Cliff somewhere. He said, would you like to come over and try something new? I went into a private room. He had a Fender P bass on the wall. I plugged into this amp with like 2 or 3 buttons, and I said, oh my God, you've created the Glenn sound. And I said, I gotta come over. I switched from Laney to Orange, and they've been with me ever since, and they've been really supportive of me, as you know. And over the years, they've made a Glenn combo, signature purple edition, limited edition. We've sold out many times on that. And then now you got the Glenn signature bass guitar, the purple bass guitar, which is fucking great.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had it in the studio. Well, both things we've had in, and they're absolutely killer. But you wouldn't expect anything less from Orange, of course. Now, just talking a bit on. Sorry, carry on.
No, they are the greatest company. Now, look. Let's be clear: Marshall and Orange, and of course Laney, and other companies, but those 3. But I've been with Marshall. No, actually, I was Marshall coordinated with Purple for a bit. But for me, Orange. My God, that bass sound! Come on. I used to have Hiwatts in Purple, and I wanted to recreate that sound, and Orange have recreated it for me.
And you go back with Cliff quite a bit, though. Was he trying to get you involved decades ago?
We were very good friends, but he knew I was with Purple when I met him, and I was doing Hiwatt. I was at Hiwatt then. I didn't really want to move back then, and and when I came back with BCC, I went because I'm from the middle. I live in America, but I was hanging out in Birmingham, and I met with the guys at Laney, and they designed something for me, which was great. And then of course I met Cliff again in 2010, and the rest is history.
Yeah, of course, no, for sure. Now, you've played with so many great. I mean, I don't think there's a vocalist in history that's had the amount of talented guitar players that you could, that full list that you've worked with is just unbelievable. Now, it would take 6 hours to get your full takes on all of these guys. But if I just name off a handful of these names, and you give me like your first impressions of working with them, would that be all right?
Yeah.
So let's start with the Joe Satriani.
What a great guitar player, and what a great, kind, soulful human being. I love this boy. I met Joe ages ago, and we played together at the Marshall 50th at Wembley, as you know, amongst other great guitar players. And Joe asked me that day, would have been 11 years ago, if he would, if I could not sing on an album, but play bass on an album, of course. Well, we did that in 2017. And we've been really, really close friends, and I love him. I just was with him about 2 months ago. And there may be more to come from Joe and I. We're really close.
Oh, lovely. Joe Bonamassa.
In my opinion, the greatest rock blues guitar player alive today. You've got to remember, Clapton back in his youth was incredible. We got to be clear about Clapton being blues rock king in the late 60s, as you know. We have to, doff our cap to that. But since, you've got, both Vai and Satriani in their world, and Eric Johnson. But in general, when you think blues rock, you think of only one. You think of only one, and it's Joe. And John, for me, music is one thing, but personality is another thing. When you're working with, and I've worked with some guitar players that are not so nice, but Joseph is a genuinely good, kind man.
Tell us about Tommy Bolin.
Oh dear. After Mel Galley, I'm an only child, and after losing Mel, when I joined Purple, I was left with, in a band that weren't really a family band, as you know. It really wasn't a fun place to be. And then when Tommy came in, by the way, on his audition, Bowie drove me down to the audition to meet Tommy. And I walked up to Tommy. I saw this guy with green and purple hair. I whispered in his ear, "Even if you don't get the gig, you're coming back to my house tonight." And he got the gig, and he stayed at my house for 3 months. He moved in with me, and we became the bestest friends, as you may imagine. We wrote Getting Tighter the first week together at my studio. And look, I can talk about guitar player and friends all day, but Tommy's my top 3 friends and guitar players.
Now I'll skip Mel because you've said some great stuff about him, and we know your love there for him as well. Just a couple more just before I move on. But Gary Moore.
Oh dear, met Gary. Great story. Shit, I was down in Hollywood making an album with Al Cooper. Please Google who he is. He produced Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Al Cooper played keyboards with Bob Dylan. I was making an album with him and Jeff Skunk Baxter from the Doobie Brothers. And Phil Lynott showed up with Gary, and I knew of Gary Moore, of course. I'm a big Skid Row fan from the 60s. And that day in that studio, great to see Phil again. I'd known Phil from the start. I met Gary, and Gary and I became very quick friends. And this is crazy. This is a well-known story. That week, Gary had spent a lot of time in my home, and he said, he came over to my house one night, and he stayed, and he said, okay, if I move my stuff over here from the Sunset Marquee, and I said, why don't you come and stay with me for a little while? So, remember, he's touring with Lizzie at the time, and one morning he woke up and says, I've decided. He's sober. He said, I'm going to leave Lizzie. I said, what? I said, well, you better tell him. He said, no, I'm not going to tell him. So a couple of days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from Phil. You see, is he over there? I said, who? He said, you know who I'm talking about. I thought, fuck me. I mean, he scared the fucking shit out of me. So I had to lie. Next morning, I told Gary, and he had to call him up, So that's the story of that.
But there's
a side of Phil, you don't want to fuck with Phil. So,
I bet, no, for sure. And I have to ask Ritchie Blackmore, of course.
Difficult. When I joined the band, he flew me to Hamburg for a boys' night weekend. We slept. We didn't sleep on 2 stairs up, drinking coffee and alcohol. And we were great together. Great time with him alone. As soon as he's around other men, he wasn't personal. It was difficult, but very intelligent, smart, but a difficult person to know and play with.
Tony Iommi.
Beautiful guy, very soft-spoken, funny, dark sense of humor, the king of metal guitar, partly because of his fingertips being plastic, if you don't mind me saying so. That's the creation of that particular sound. But Tony, that doesn't matter what I just said. Tony's way of riff writing is simple. I was with him writing those. I let him write the riffs. Standing, he looks at me in the eyes. He's writing these riffs. I'm going. He said, hang on, I've got another one. I've got another one. How many more have you fucking got? He's got an endless supply of riffs. He'd leave me with a riff. I'd go home. And I'd come up with something for it, and he was incredible. The greatest riff writer, and nobody like it.
Do you think we could see a follow-up to Fused?
We talk about it. His health is important. We are. I wouldn't say close to doing something, but I know he's working on something right now. I don't know what he's doing. My manager Jim is really close to him, but it wouldn't surprise me if I do something else with Tone. I don't know when. I can't be too long away from now, but we have to wait and see.
Of course, I mean, as you mentioned there, he's just a riff machine, and you're a songwriting machine. Glenn, was there other things that got recorded there that we've not heard
with him?
Those sessions? Yeah.
No, well, the Depth sessions was a demo we did, and that was a demo session, but somebody bootlegged it. So,
It always made
there
me wonder
might
if there was more, to that, that being sort of leaked, if there was more.
there may there may be some demos that Tony and I wrote alone. Dave Holland would have been on those too. That Tony had a studio built into his home. In '95, I think it was. We did that. You'd have to ask him.
I'll do that. I'll do that for sure. Reflecting on the Sabbath days, I know you've talked in the past about mixed feelings about it. Obviously, you were delighted to be playing with him and getting involved. But how do you feel now, reflecting on it?
Very mixed feelings, because when Tony called me in 1985, and I was home alone in LA, and he said, "Listen, I'm doing a solo album. I've asked Rob Halford and Ronnie to sing a couple of songs, and would you be prepared to come down and sing a couple of songs?" I said, "Sure." So I went down the next night to a place called Cherokee Studios in Hollywood, and they had a song on the console. It was they had no lyrics to it, and it was obviously they asked me to write lyrics to a song, and I called it "No Stranger to Love." And that first night I sang that song, as you know. And when I left, Tony says, "Well, can you come back tomorrow?" And I went back the next night, and I might have sung Danger Zone. And then I went back the next night, and I might have sung, In Memory or something. And then he said, "Well, I'm going to go to Atlanta and finish the album with Jeff Glixman. Do you fancy coming with me?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So it was my birthday around that 85 August, and we went down, we finished the album. Now, look, I say mixed feelings because Tony invited me to sing on a solo album. And I want to make it very clear. It's very difficult to say this because people think they know I'm not metal. I'm not metal. But the album with Tony, although he's a metal guitar player, it wasn't really metal, in my opinion. So if you'd have told me I'm doing a Black Sabbath album, I probably would have said, I'm not going to do it. I can't be another geezer, another Ozzy or Ronnie. Ronnie is my best friend. So I said, no, it wouldn't fit for me. And of course, on the last song, Don says, "We've changed our mind. We're going to call it Black Sabbath." So there you go.
Management getting involved again.
Well, Don Arden, when Don Arden said something, you did what he said. So Tony wasn't happy, and I wasn't really happy because I gave Tony a solo Tony performance,
Of course. Now, as you mentioned, that was supposed to be a solo record, and arguably, even when Ronnie joined the band, some people sort of felt, wait, is this Sabbath? Because it's got such a different kind of sound to it. It's obviously all these albums are fantastic. Seventh Sound, fantastic record as well. Are you of the opinion that when the voice of the band leaves, when because it's happened many times with Van Halen and AC/DC and what have you, can it still, I don't know, like should the name change at that point, do you think? Look, or is it okay?
You just mentioned two bands where it worked. Sam's different to Dave. A much better vocalist is Sam. Dave was a great frontman. Bon Scott, gritty character, and then fucking what's his face? Brian Johnson came in, who's from Geordie and had that insane northern throaty voice, and it worked for that band. It worked great, but it's never really worked for any other fucking band. You can't replace Jagger, and you really can't replace Robert. It's difficult. But I don't know if you know this, but when Ronnie left Richie, he lived up in upstate New York. He called me and said, "I'm going to move to LA with Wendy. We want to know where you live, and we're going to house." They got a house near me because Ronnie was my best friend in 1978. So Ronnie came to see me, and I remember very clearly when Tony called me to see if I knew anybody that could, replace Ozzy. I said, "Well, why don't you give Ronnie a call?" So I was around on the early auditions. I was around on the early songwriting. A lot of it was done at Ronnie's home in the valley. So I was like, I saw that a lot of that shit go down. Though I saw a lot of those songs wrote, you know. So I was very like a fly on the wall thing for me.
I thought it was interesting there that out of the bands you mentioned that it's worked. You didn't mention Purple. And of course that did work tremendously with yourself and Coverdale.
You know, what worked for me, I never really listened to Purple. I wasn't really a big Purple fan. And Ian Gillan had a great voice in 71, but I never really was a Gillan fan. I'm sorry, I just wasn't that. I'm a different kind of singer. He's got a good voice, but it's not my favorite kind of voice. But David and I weren't supposed to sound like Gillan, and we didn't. And I thought if they'd have got a Gillan sounding singer for Burn, it wouldn't have worked. You can't replace Gillan with a Ian Gillan sound alike. You can't do it. You know, you couldn't replace Roth with a David Roth sound alike. Wouldn't work.
You had mixed feelings about the Rock Hall of Fame. Obviously, what a tremendous honour for them to have you as part of the Hall. That's the honour. I know on the night, you know, you sort of said there was, you know, some mixed things or what have you. Have you talked to any, apart from David, of course, have you talked to any of the other guys since?
No, I will never speak to any of them again, simply because they were rude. Both Roger, Ian, and Gillan were rude to David and I. Very, very hurtful. I didn't give a fuck, actually, because I knew they were rude to begin with. I was the only sober man there. I don't care about those guys. Gillan was rude to me on stage, accepting the award. I went to congratulate him. He looked at me in the eyes like I didn't exist. The guy has a problem with me, period. I'll let him run with it. I feel bad for him. I'm really sorry about his wife. I've tried to reach out to him. He doesn't want to know. I've tried to make some kind of friendship with him over the last 40 years. He doesn't want to know. He doesn't want to, David and Coverdale and I don't exist to him. I wish him only the very best, but I have no time left for that behaviour.
Fair enough. Now here's a daft one, Glenn. The KLF, that track must have the most insane scream to kick off a track in the history of music. What's some of your memories of recording that track and the crazy music video where you're getting battered with all the water?
Yeah, look, those guys call me, you know, Bill called me, you know, Bill, my friend Bill called me down. He's a big trapeze fan, and he called me, said, listen, we want, it's either you or Daltrey to be on this track. I went, well, I'll be down in a minute. I was in London at the time. I went down there, and they put the role, you know, I basically, I knew what it was. They, you know, they had a rapper on there. All I had to do was, you what I'm in love. I had to sing the chorus, you know, and a couple of screams and a couple of Glennisms. Took me about an hour. And when I'd finished, Bill says, well, you're in. Do you want to do a video clip? I said, and the great news about this, Jonathan, when he said, we want you to do a video clip, I went, I better get my shit together. That's when I started going, I better get into Betty Ford. I better make some calls. I think this could be a big song in Europe, and it was, as you know. That's the nemesis to get me sober. I want to thank Bill for being the nemesis to get me into Betty Ford.
That's incredible. I had no idea that was such an important. I mean, I love it. I love the track. I just love hearing you on it. But I had no idea that was such a catalyst for you.
I think we recorded it in November, and I went into Betty Ford in February, and I knew the song was coming out in early March. I got out March the 2nd. I flew to London because I knew it was coming out. I get to London, Top of the Pops. It's number 4. Woohoo! How about that? And I was right. That song got me a lot of recognition. And now you're looking at a clean and sober Glenn Hughes.
Incredible, Glenn. Now, Steve Albini just passed away yesterday.
Oh, my God.
Did you have any dealings with him? I'm sure you were a fan of some of his work.
I am. Look, what he did, a number of fans, what he did on Nirvana, I mean, oh, my God. The sound, the working with those three would have been difficult. But the sound of those albums, man, unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
Absolutely. Now, you've said in the past, talking about early sort of formative years and albums that have had an impact on you, that Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience was one of those 10. Obviously, it's not that many years removed from, Trapeze kicking off and, and you going out there and dominating the 70s and 80s and beyond. Yeah. If Hendrix had survived, where do you think his music would have gone?
If Trapeze would have
musical direction.
If Trapeze would have survived?
No. I was just saying there in terms of when that was sort of formative for you at 67 coming out, obviously you were kicking things off with Trapeze just a couple of years later, and then you go on through the 70s and 80s and you see how music has progressed and how you've evolved. If Hendrix had survived and lived through that time period, where do you think his music would have gone, the direction?
Whose music?
Jimi Hendrix.
Oh my God! So now, and this is, and God, respectfully, people understand when I say this. How do I say that? I'm talking from a recovering alcoholic now. If Jimmy had never taken a substance or never drank, I still believe he could have been Jimi Hendrix. But I think we all know what took his life. It was a drug overdose, as you know, and what took Tommy Bolin's life was a drug overdose. For me, if those guys could have lived drug-free and alcohol-free, number one, they still would be alive, and I believe they would have been so. I think the music would have changed. It would have been something completely different, but it would still have been them. It would still be a trademark. There are musicians that take a lot of drugs that never recover. They never they've lost their ability to have their brand, But for me, if Tommy and any great musician like Janis Joplin or Jim Morrison would have kept sobriety, they would have been incredible. But drugs took their life and drugs took their ability to perform. I think Jimmy never really affected his music, But you got to remember, drugs took their life.
Of course. Just two more quick ones, Glenn, and then I'll let you go. I always appreciate your time, of course. Yeah. Now, you mentioned in the past your fantastic period with David Bowie and the fun that you guys had. Now, he was writing station to station at your house, I understand. Yeah. What were some of the surprising things that you saw in his process that you were able to adapt to yourself?
Well, this is what I've known David since, I've met him in 74, a Cal Jam period, where he was watching it on the TV in front of me. And he was fascinated by my R&B technique. And David at that time was learning R&B. And then over the course of the next few months, I'd stay with him in New York, and, he would come to me and stay at my home. And I got a call from him in February of 75, and he asked me privately, I'm going to come on a train to LA. Can I stay with you? And I said, you're coming alone? He said, yeah. I said, don't you think that's a bit risky? He said, no, I'll traveling alone. I'll be incognito. It took 3 days for him to get there. And I was with Purple on that European tour, that last, European tour, with Blackmore. So I had my assistant pick him up at the station. And 3 days later, I got there and he was there, So, and when I got there, he was throwing some of my clothes away from my closet, some of the bell bottoms and some of the boots. And we had dinner one night and he said, listen, you got to keep changing, man. Then he decides we should cut your hair. So for me, then I saw him writing the new, the Thin White Duke. Now obviously he's not the Ziggy Stardust anymore, and he's not the David Live. He's now the Thin White Duke. He changed his character, and I learned so much from him changing. That's what I've taken with me ever since.
Amazing.
By the way, when I'm done this Purple tour, you'll notice a definite change in my look next year. In my, I think you'll notice it in my clothes, and there'll be a different style, and because I can only do this look for so long. and that I love the Purple Legacy, but I'm saying goodbye to it in November. Thanks to Bowie, because if he was still alive right now, he'd be calling me saying, "Are you still doing that?" He would be very pissed off.
That's big news. Glenn, last final thing. There's all these rock biopics that have come out over the years. You know, your life is just totally cinematic and would make perfect viewing for that. But I won't ask you who should play you in the movie, but what plays over the end credits?
I don't know whether it's a Glenn song or somebody else's song. You know, for me, my mother would always say, you know, don't leave them sad, you know. It wouldn't be Monty Python, you know. I'd probably leave something that was really important for me as far as a human condition song, you know. I wouldn't say it'd be melancholy, but it was something, you know, deeply educational for people to remember the work I did. But all I'm concerned about after I've left is I leave this planet a better place than when it came in on it, because, you know, I've been studying, you know, Buddhism for 30 years now, and I am a different person. And, you know, I was never born, I'll never die. I am not my body, I'm not my mind. I'm not the bones and the flesh. I am the source within. I am the root of self, you know. I'm a little child within. I look at myself and, oh my God, is that me? I can't be besieged by the way I look. If I look at my old body, I'm going, I can't possibly do this every night. So I don't even look anymore. I just can't go there. You know, I want to be the last man standing. And my life is run from within me. It's all within. It's not external. It's all about the little child within me.
Glenn, it's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good stuff.